So first of all, thank you for inviting me to speak today. And my presentation entitled Putting the Pieces Together. Literally, it was that. There are all kinds of pieces that come together in order to publish a book. And if you've ever published a book, you'll totally understand why I say that there's a lot of pieces. But first, I'd like to give some background information. In 2004, I received a call from administration office asking me to meet with the president of the hospital. If you can imagine, that's like being called to the principal's office. I wondered, what in the world does he want? And he called me into his office and he said, I would like you to take over the history of the hospital. We wanted to make sure that we have some place to keep it and we want to keep it safe. And I'd like to ask you if you would do that. And I jumped at the opportunity. He also said, I'm going to give you $5,000 as a startup cost to put together this archives. I think this is even better than that. I love history. It's actually my first love. And so I was really excited about that. But to define the scope of the collection, I said, okay, this is Vassar Brothers Medical Center. I'm only going to collect and put into the archives whatever's pertinent to the history of the hospital only. So I'm not getting involved with the city of Poughkeepsie or anything else, so specifically the hospital. So the very first donation that I received to the archives was a tea set. It was engraved and donated to the hospital in 1952. And I found it wrapped up in felt and in these decrepit boxes. And so I took them back to the library, started to unpack them, and like, whoa. This tea set looks a lot older than 1952. So I started to do some research and discovered that this tea set, most likely, it was manufactured in the early 1800s. So this was a family heirloom that was donated to the hospital. And that set us on the path. This photo was found stored in the bottom of a box on a top shelf in a closet in the administration office. It was my first glimpse of the original hospital, and I was hooked. The photo started me on an extensive search for whatever I could find, hidden in closets. Maybe there's stuff in the basement. I need to go all over this place, see what I can find. I also put out an email to everyone, and I said, hey, if you find anything in your closets, in your break rooms, wherever, just if it looks historical, please don't throw it away, pass it on to me. And I was amazed at all the items that came to me. Things like a 1940s EKG machine with the tape still inside with a little zigzag. Like, oh my goodness, this is actually somebody's EKG. A brass pregnancy calculator, very interesting. A 1960s microscope and a silver ashtray with the hospital's name engraved on it back in the day when they could smoke inside, right? So my curiosity was piqued, especially with all these photographs. They were absolutely amazing, including this one of the first engine-powered automobile ambulance. And based on the vehicle design and just the body style and everything, we dated this photo to maybe 1926, 1927. Surprisingly, the name of the driver was written on the back of the photograph, and the name of the physician was written on the back of the photograph, but no year. So I did some research and I thought, wonder if we can figure out anything more about this. And I came across a celebration of the driver when he celebrated his 35th anniversary at the hospital. Like, okay, that was 1962. If we take 1962, subtract 35, what do we get? 1927. Yes, I now have a date for this photograph. Here's everyone's favorite photo of the hospital. This is a surgery team in 1913. And you'll notice two things. Number one, they are not wearing masks. And number two, they are wearing black gloves. Masks were not worn in surgery until the 1920s. And since this is 1913, that explains why they did not have masks on. And the black gloves would be washed. They would be taken outside and hung up on a clothesline to dry, and then they would put them on for the next surgery. They also did surgeries only in the early morning or late afternoon, and far to the left of this photograph, you can barely see the outline of a window, which provided pretty good lighting for them. So this photo, along with hundreds more, help us tell the story of Vassar. We also had a School of Nursing from 1890 to 1972. We have uniforms, photos, yearbooks, and memorabilia as all part of that collection. So on to the history. Why would I undertake writing a history of the hospital? Well, after several years of building the collection, I came to the realization that there was a very rich history here that really needed to be told. A brief history of the hospital had been written for in 1962, and it was Vassar Brothers Hospital, the 75th anniversary booklet. It was pretty good. There was also another booklet written in the centennial in 1987. It was called The Lifetimes. And this book was specifically a public relations piece. It was meant to go to the community. Pretty good, but not what I was going for. I wanted to write an actual history of the hospital. So I put up huge sheets of Post-it note paper, you know, the kind you can tear off and stick up on the wall. And I created a timeline. And I put it up inside the archives, and I just started building it. At the time, I had a student intern position, and I had several college students working with me. They had a blast going through all the photographs, photocopying and making these little ones to put up on this timeline, and we figured out where things needed to go. They also helped me a lot with the scanning and metadata. Over the years, I had numerous conversations with physicians and people on staff. And all of their stories were in my head, not a good place to store stuff. So I decided that's another reason why I needed to get it out on paper. Also, I had done some research at Adrian's Public Library and their local history section, and I came across some articles that had been written about the hospital. And one of the most interesting things that they have is an interview with one of the first employees at the hospital. And he was an orderly. He also did maintenance. He also helped carry people to surgery and carry patients back from surgery. I mean, he did everything. And his interview was just absolutely amazing. So how do I get started with all this? Who am I writing this for? And I decided that this history would be written for posterity. Strictly history, and I tried to keep it as chronological as possible. I chose to put in editorial comments when something needed to have more of a context to it, or if something needed to be clarified. I took the time to read through many annual reports. And no surprise to anyone who's ever worked with old photographs, you can't 100% rely on the dates written on the back of those photographs. So I had to do a lot of research. I took over an unused desk in the library office and dedicated it to this project. That way, whenever I had time to work on it, I could just go ahead and work on it, and then I could go back and do whatever else I needed to do. I didn't have to take it in and out all the time. And my first draft, which at the time I was quite proud of, was a Word document, and it was 46 pages long. And I thought, hey, this is pretty good. I think I'm onto something. But I do have to talk about scanning and images and copyright. There are hundreds and hundreds of photographs in our collection. I haven't actually counted them, but I think there's pretty close to 2,000 photographs. And I wanted to include them all, but I knew that was not possible. So choosing which ones to put in, that was the most arduous task. What about copyright? While we do own the photographs, we don't necessarily own the copyright to those images. There was a set of really great photographs taken in the 1930s. And there was a stamp on the back. It was the photographer's stamp. I think, okay, this is good. I'll do some research about this photographer and make sure I can get permission from the photographer. Well, he died in 1945. He never married, had no heirs. What do we do with that? The other thing that I did was contact one of our construction companies because there were two pictures that I wanted to include, and I asked for their permission. And they said, absolutely, we'll give you permission to just make sure that you put our company name under the two images, which I did. But how to handle the one who didn't have any heirs? So I just made sure to put a copyright statement at the end of the book. There's a lot of writing, more writing, and more writing, paragraph shifting, and oh no, that's not in the right chronological order. I need to move that. So what I would do is if I ended up with a whole bunch of revisions in one of my copies, I would just start over again and open up a new draft. I did that 7 times. I just found it easier to work on a new fresh draft rather than going through all the edits all the time. I had to rescan and reformat many of the images to improve the quality. And as I pillaged the archives for the best photos, I also found myself making date corrections, and I ended up sorting through these photos, reorganizing them, putting them into different boxes and different categories. And all of this was done whenever I had the time, because this wasn't my day job. My day job is the librarian at Vassar Brothers Medical Center, but this was my love, and I was really working hard at it. So whenever I had some discretionary time, which turned out to be 4 months from March until July of 2020, and you all know why, that ended up being the perfect time to really focus on a lot of the writing. So did I finally get to a point where I thought I could stop? But I think this is starting to come together as a cohesive whole. I had to find a stopping point. So you're writing history, you have the history, but then you have the current history. Where do I end this? So I decided that I would end the history with the opening of the new patient pavilion in January of 2021. The next step was to hire an editor, because no matter how many times I had looked through this, I knew that I was not going to be able to actually see some of the mistakes or typos that I probably had read over 1,000 times. So not only does a good editor, they work on the grammar, they work on the spelling, typos, everything, but they work on other things like, did you know that there are 5 different kinds of hyphens or dashes? I did not know this, and when I expressed surprise to my editor, she said, well, that's why you hired me. Finding a graphics designer turned out to be a little more difficult because my project was too small for publishers. They didn't even want to take a look at it. And so I needed somebody to be able to put this into some kind of final product. It's, that printers, they don't accept a Word document. It's just not, they have to have this, what they call camera ready. So no, we can't do a print from a Word document. We need this to be all laid out. So I ended up finding a graphics designer in our own corporation, and she actually gave of her own personal time to work on this. And I just can't thank her enough for that. The one thing to remember when we're working with a graphics designer is that they assume when you send them whatever you want them to work on, that it is ready. Like, they're not editing, they're not changing, they're not questioning anything. So it really does have to be complete and final when it goes to a graphic designer. So it was several weeks of going back and forth to get the page layouts just right. And then she and I started working on a cover. Well, you'll see in this picture, you can see an arm and a leg. Okay. When she sent me her mock-up of the cover, she had Matthew Vassar Sr. in the upper left-hand corner. Matthew Vassar Sr. founded Vassar College. This is Vassar Brothers Medical Center. So I took the pictures of the 2 brothers, Matthew and John Guy, and I cut them out, I pasted it, I scanned it, sent it back to her, and I said, this is about the hospital, not the college. That's Matthew, the uncle. These are the 2 brothers who are his nephews, and so we have to get them in there. And she wrote back, she goes, oops, sorry about that. She said, I'll get that fixed for you. Working with a printer was interesting because I did not know that there are 7 or 10 different kinds of papers and different kinds of binding. I mean, what would work best? And I said to the printer, well, I want this to have some longevity. I don't want people opening and closing this and then having it fall apart in just a few years. We didn't want to go with a spiral bound because we have a lot of images on the front cover and that would just cut through the images. So we finally came up with what we thought would be the best. And we went to print. And I can tell you the day that I pulled the trigger and sent the message to the printer that yes, go to print, I was like, I wonder what it's going to look like after all of this work. So here are a few things that I learned through this entire process of trying to write a history. set way more time aside to do something like this than you ever thought you would need. This actually, from the time I conceived of the idea of doing this until we actually went to print, was 7 years. Yeah, 7 years from start to finish. So it really took a long time. In the last month of the project, literally the last month, the laptop where I had everything stored decided to crash. Nothing was recoverable. So I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to back up, have copies, extra backup. Fortunately, I had just the week before, so I didn't lose everything, but still, that was quite the difficult thing to work through. A good editor is worth gold. I worked with my editor over a couple of months, and she was just absolutely amazing. And I was happy to write the check to pay her for the job that she did. And don't assume that even when the editor is done and they say, okay, here it is, and you're good to go. I still went back through it one more time, and I actually emailed her and I said, Sarah, you're not going to believe this. I found a typo on page 35. And she wrote back and she said, good for you. It was just funny. So accept the fact that after it is published, there's probably going to be a mistake. You want it to be perfect. It's one of these things, it's like, you just want it to come out perfect. But as my editor told me, don't worry, there's always second editions. Oh, that's why they do second editions. Never really thought about that before. So yes, there was a mistake. Actually, there were two. One of them was a historical fact mistake. I'm like, man, I thought I had triple checked everything. The other one was just simply a caption under a photo that was incorrect. So I have a little corrections page, a little slip of paper, and I just slip it in the back of the book just in case that, because I don't know who's going to be reading this because I wrote it for posterity. So, 100 years from now, I want to make sure that the information is correct. So, was it worth all the effort? Absolutely. So, A Vision Born, A History of Vassar Brothers Medical Center, 1887 to 2021. And yes, I do have copies of this if you're interested. They are upstairs in the office. Oh, they're over here. Oh, they're over here. They brought them down. Okay. So if you're interested in a copy, they are here. The boxes arrived in my library and I started to unpack the first one, and seeing the results, I feel like I'm going to quote a commercial right now. Priceless, just to see that it was finally done. So thank you for listening about my project. And if you ever want to undertake something like this, I will tell you right now, go for it. Any questions?
In terms of the support of the medical center, are they distributing this? Is this, considered? Well, I guess my question early on was like, did they want to read it and vet it before it went out? If it was somehow representing?
Okay. Two parts to your question. One is, has the medical center supported it? And the number two, is it getting out there? Yes, the medical center allowed me to do this as part of my job. So the intellectual property of this book actually belongs to the medical center because I did it as part of my job. And yes, when the president asked me to take this over, it has become part of my job. So I am the librarian, also the archivist. And so, yes, I do have support for it. And every year I do put some money into my budget to continue to upkeep the archives. As far as the staff, I've been passing this out to everyone and they absolutely love it. I've had a lot of great feedback. I actually took the time to mail this out to former staff people I knew, physicians who had retired that I had worked with over the years, and they all came back and said, this is fantastic. Thank you so much for doing this. We don't think anybody else would have taken the time to do it, and we're so glad that you did. So a lot of positive feedback. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.